Hi everyone, hope you had a nice lunch and welcome. This is the second breakout session of the G1 meeting titled Entrepreneurship in Japan and Asia. My name is Adam Kassab, I'm a lecturer here on the MBA program. And let me just very quickly introduce the panel. We have Daisuke Iwase, who's the co-founder and managing director of LifeNet Insurance Company. Also Terry Lloyd, CEO of Link Media Group and CEO of Japan Inc. Holdings Group. Alan Miner, who's the CEO of Sunbridge Corporation. And Alan Patrikoff, who's founder and managing director of Grey Coat Partners. And the moderator for the discussion is on my right here, Shinichi Takamiya. So today, the session will finish at 2:15 today. So having said all that, I'll hand over now to Takamiya.
Good afternoon, everybody. After you heard touching stories from the Tohoku students, I hope we can energize you with infusing entrepreneurship into you. And as the big theme of G1 Global today is rebirth of Japan, I think entrepreneurship has a key role to play to realize that. Re-energizing the Tohoku area and regaining new industry power for Japan as a macro. So let's move on to introducing our panelists. So from your left, we have Mr. Alan Patrikoff, who is the legendary VC. Alan, please self-introduction. What do you do at Grey Coat?
Hi. Is this on? Yeah. I've been in the venture capital business probably before many people were born, but since 1970 when I started my firm. And I built it into one of the biggest firms in the world today, which is Apax Partners, which is in 12 countries. And that's how I became connected with the Yoshihori and the Globus Group when we formed Apax Globus, which was one of our many funds, and this was one for Japan, which we started in 1999. I built, as I said, Apax, starting out with $2 million, and we now have under management $40 billion around the world, and it's moved from a venture firm to a mega buyout firm, which is a totally different business. So 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to go back into the venture capital business, and I started all over again with a small amount of money, with a whole new team, and we've now been through our second fund, and we are in the venture capital business primarily in the United States, offices in New York and Los Angeles. We have a few investments abroad, and our principal focus is in anything that's delivered through the internet or through a mobile device. And our timing was very good, as you obviously know that the last 5 or 6 years has been very, very strong in those areas.
I think then we have Mr. Alan Miner, who is like a super supporter, incubator, cross-border Japan and US.
Right, I'm Alan Miner. Sunbridge has been investing in Japanese startups since about 2000. And we began in 2008 a joint project with Plug and Play in a large incubator in Silicon Valley to encourage Japanese students, Japanese entrepreneurs to tap into the Silicon Valley ecosystem, because for about 2003 I was becoming increasingly concerned that the Japanese companies were going public so quickly that they would never go global, that they would miss their opportunity to have an impact worldwide by being caught up in the obligations that they have to domestic shareholders. In 2011, in January this year, we began our third incubation center in Osaka, And the goal there is, with the help of the Osaka government, to encourage more foreign cloud computing companies to set up in Osaka and reinforce the branding of the Kansai area as a global center of green technology innovation, with cloud computing being the most energy efficient form of information technology delivery, and working with entrepreneurs in the Osaka area on expanding internationally and exposing the world to some of the very advanced biotechnology and green technology that exists in the continent. So we're based now in Tokyo, Silicon Valley, and Osaka, and working with companies and startups both in Japan and the United States.
And now we have Mr. Terry Lloyd, who is a Pan-Asian entrepreneur.
Actually, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm so far in Japan established in excess of 20 companies. I first started my entrepreneurial background in 1983, starting up a translation company with my first wife. And 87, we bought PCs from China, from one of the first factories. 90, we bought the first Indian engineers from India. 97, we started the first online recruiting through Daijob.com. Some of you may know that site. And haven't really done too much since then, actually. But hopefully tomorrow we will be launching 2 new websites that will do what Daijob has done. My personal mission is to help open up Japan to foreigners and expose Japanese to global business. And so I spend a lot of time, as Ellen does as well, doing presentations at universities. My objective is to multiply the number of entrepreneurs out there. And the best way to do that is to provide practical experience, how to raise money, how to get the first deals, how to get the business going. I don't think things have changed much in the last 15 years in terms of venture capital and starting up companies. Anyway, so that's hopefully we can share a little bit of that today.
And we have Mr. Daisuke Iwase, who is like the new generation role model of Japanese entrepreneurs.
Good afternoon. Great pleasure to be here, especially among such distinguished speakers. LifeNet Insurance Company, we are online life insurance business, so selling directly to customers, disintermediating the very inefficient sales agents. We were launched in May 2008 with 13 billion yen in capital, so at current exchange rate that's close to 160-70 million US dollars, quite a large sum for a Japanese startup. We had the backing of many big companies such as Mitsui Bussan, Mitsui, 7-Eleven, Shinsei Bank, Recruit, and of course Globis was one of our big investors too. I think we've attracted some attention from the media for a couple of different reasons. I think we're very unique as a startup in Japan. One is the amount of money we raised. Second is the fact that we're in the life insurance industry, a very matured, old, seemingly boring industry that lacks innovation in general. And also our team, my partner is a 63-year-old industry veteran, comes from the life insurance industry, and our management team consists of professionals. So my other executive used to run marketing for Starbucks Japan. We have a bunch of young tech people from Yahoo, P&G, and also ex-government officials are on our board as well. So we're a diverse team of insurance and non-insurance people, young and experienced, private sector, public sector, etc. And we're trying to bring, I think we're trying to bring change to the way entrepreneurship is thought of in Japan. And one topic I want to discuss maybe later is the reason I thought very few of the Japanese startups really grew big was that there's a disconnection between the young entrepreneurs and the more experienced business people. And thus the young entrepreneurs were just running around by themselves and not properly respected by the establishment or the the more experienced people, and hopefully being in an industry, in a matured industry with the backing of very traditional companies, with a management team mix of industry experts and young entrepreneurs, we hope we can bring a new wave of entrepreneurship to Japan.
And I am Shin Takamiya from Globis Capital Partners. I am a venture capitalist, so I hope I can give you some feel of how it's like on the ground. So let us move on to our first topic. How is entrepreneurship in Japan? I would just like to set up the scene and just to get the feel how it is right now. So maybe Daisuke, you could start off by telling everybody how entrepreneurship and the startup ecosystem is in Japan.
So I'm not necessarily aware of the macro status, so I don't know the numbers of amount of money invested or number of new startups, etc. But what I can tell you from very personal experience is that we are seeing a new wave of young entrepreneurs rising and becoming very successful. So one of my very good friends is Yoshi Tanaka, who is the founder and CEO of Gree. I'm not sure if you are aware, but this Gree is a social gaming platform that has become close. I think market cap is about $7 billion. And Yoshi is apparently one of the world's second youngest self-made billionaire after Mark Zuckerberg. And Gree was one of the very early investors in that company. So why was Yoshi so successful? There's definitely a timing, and he rode the wave of a new industry rising, so the traditional gaming was moving to the mobile platform. But I think a more significant reason is he tells me that he's been through this before. And what he means by that is he used to work for Rakuten, which is one of the big e-commerce companies, also close with market cap exceeding $10 billion. And he was there when there were about 30 or 40 employees, I think. So he tells me that he's been through the rapid growth of how a small startup becomes a company with 1,000 employees entering a lot of different new businesses. So he says he learned everything that was necessary while he was at Rakuten. And now he's venturing out to the international markets. He recently acquired a company in the US, in Silicon Valley, also opened offices simultaneously at 5 places across the globe. Including London and China and Brazil, I think. So that's he tells me now this is a new challenge for him. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that I think we have a new rising ecosystem where serial entrepreneurs, so the first generation internet entrepreneurs, are providing money when necessary and also expertise that the new entrepreneurs lack. So many other young entrepreneurs have graduated from Rakuten and other businesses. Also, many of the early executives from Rakuten, DNA, and other internet venture businesses, they are starting to invest their own money and becoming angel investors and helping grow the new businesses. So I think up until recently, we lacked that intellectual capital or expertise in successfully growing a new venture. But as the first generation of people that have spun out from the internet companies or that have worked for these companies come to start their own businesses, I think we'll see more and more successful ventures just because of the fact that they have shared the expertise that was experienced in their early companies. So I think that's one significant change that we can definitely point to.
Is it the same path the US has came?
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything that was just said. When I came and began investing in Japan in 2000, it was the peak of the internet bubble, and many foreign firms were coming to Japan as the next internet wave. And I recall on a number of occasions trying to point out to them and to people in the press that Japan's entrepreneurial ecosystem looked a lot like Silicon Valley in 1981. Many small VC firms investing $200,000 or $300,000 each in syndication, a lot of bootstrapping, and what the foreign investors were looking for in 2000 was Silicon Valley circa 2000, and it didn't exist. And so on a number of occasions, I would point out that there seemed to be about a 20-year difference in what was going on in Japan then versus what was going on in Silicon Valley today. I recall about 4 years ago, the first time I ever heard a Japanese person refer to him as a serial entrepreneur. It was 4 or 5 years ago. I also noticed about 2 years ago this same phenomenon of people who had been involved in startups becoming angel investors, people who had been early employees of successful startups starting their own companies. And of course, there were significant changes in the regulatory environment, in the thinking about the role of the universities in society. A lot of structural changes driven by good thinking and very good policymaking by MIDI in the early part of the decade that I think laid the groundwork for this emergence of not the top-down creation, but the bottom-up emergence of an increasingly active entrepreneurial community. And the last thing I would say, I've noticed a dramatic change in the last year in the international attitudes of young entrepreneurs, of people trying to establish a presence in Silicon Valley from the very beginning, or expanding and thinking of China and Southeast Asia as part of I haven't heard Japanese people thinking of Korea as one of their markets, but I hear a lot of attention to China and Southeast Asia as markets. So my sense is very much that we're now at the stage of Silicon Valley around 1990, 1991, which was one of the peak times for really good company formation and really good venture capital returns up until about 95, 96. So we may be in the early stage of a golden era of entrepreneurship here in Japan, because that first generation, the first generation of university startups was of questionable quality, a lot of them. A lot of professors' research projects that were not really businesses, but we've had a decade now to learn what works and what doesn't work in university. So I think we're at a point in time where there are some very exciting things happening, and it may be one of the most exciting places, and it's the least understood. I was in a panel at Stanford a couple of weeks ago about the flyover effect and why are all the Japanese VCs flying to China, investing there, and not paying attention to China. I said, it's a fact, and I hope it never changes, because it leaves a lot of opportunity for me and a handful of other investors who see what's going on in Japan and participate in it.
Terry, you're familiar with situation in maybe Vietnam, China, New Zealand, and Australia. Do you see any other characteristics of Japanese ecosystem?
I'm sorry.
Do you see any other characteristics of Japanese ecosystem compared to other countries?
That's a difficult question. I want to echo one thing that Alan mentioned. So. Actually, if you think about GRI got started a few years ago. Actually, since the Lehman shock, it's actually really difficult again for startups to raise cash. And so actually it's quite interesting, GRI and Dina and some of the other companies are actually setting up 5 million yen per company shotgun VC funds, which is kind of like the, what's that incubator, the Y Combinator. That's right. Yeah, so that's the latest sort of program. And actually, I became a founder member of TIE, T-I-E, the Indus Entrepreneurs, who now have a chapter in Tokyo last year. And TIE is, as you may know, sort of formed in Silicon Valley, Indian expats, and has since become global and has dropped a lot of the Indian connection, although it's still there. So TIE found an incubator in Ikebukuro called Samurai Ventures maybe. Anyway, they have about 40 companies in there. And I wouldn't say they're all high quality, but it's really interesting to see this Y Combinator type approach going on in Ikebukuro, which isn't fashionable at all. And then TIE is picking up those some of those companies and sending them off to the TIE Global 50 for presentations, elevator presentations, and so on, and actually coming back with some of those companies getting funded. So, you know, the traditional VCs, the angels, I would say right at the moment they're all somewhat hesitant to invest any significant sums because, well, the world's in turmoil. But there are deliberate things going on the ground. So anyway, that's the Japan side. Alan's absolutely right that there's this flyover effect going both directions. Japan is perceived as a country that's seen its best and is now in a downward spiral. Of course, when you're in a downward spiral in an old industry, what do? You start up some replacement, right? And so, you know, there is a big gap going on here. We can tell that lots of good things are going on in places like India and China and so on because they move a lot quicker in startups selling out and then the founders of those startups going on to become investors. And so 2 days ago, I had a conversation with a guy in Mumbai. I wasn't there, I'm just talking to him. He started his company 5 years ago. He sold it a few weeks ago, and now he's getting ready to start investing. And he wants to invest connecting Japan, India, and a few other countries into India. I'm seeing the same thing in Vietnam. So why is this being enabled? Fundamentally, it's being enabled by foreign money initially going in and kickstarting those markets. Much the same as Japan had a small bubble back in 98 and 99. And then also in India's case in particular, of course, because of this Thai relationship and the fact that these expat Indian entrepreneurs who've made money in Silicon Valley are then going back to India and reinvesting. So that's pretty interesting. And a lot of those guys see their mission, their life mission is giving back. So they're going back to their roots. So there's a real passion about it, and they're making decisions and investment decisions probably they wouldn't do in the States and probably at much smaller levels, but it works for India. For Vietnam, if I was to classify countries, Vietnam and Asia is probably the closest in mentality to Japan. I really like working with Vietnamese software companies. You ask them to do something and they react just like a Japanese software company, except they're like 10% of the cost. So, you know, they give a really very fixed schedule, extreme detail. They work till midnight, they work weekends. You tell them that you have a deadline next Tuesday, they'll be ready next Tuesday. And the quality of the code is probably 85–90% of what it is here in Japan. So when we use a Vietnamese company, we have somebody local to polish, but we do all the cost savings in in Vietnam. Actually, I use software companies in India too, and it's like night and day watching the difference between the two. So most of the action that's going on in Vietnam is structured standard businesses where they're basically arbitraging labor cost. So we're not seeing a lot of new creative startups at this stage. But in India, there seems to be, they've already moved to that sort of Silicon Valley framework, and you're getting some quite interesting new companies coming out, which, you know, has got the juices going for investors who like that kind of action. For me, that would mean that Vietnam is a better place to go. So, just for what it's worth.
Well, let me answer it a little differently. I went to England in 1977 when the word venture was, first of all, when I got in venture capital in 1970, the word didn't even exist. But in 1977, 78, when I went to the UK, it didn't exist there at all. In 81, when I went to France, it didn't exist. 89, when I went to Germany, etc. And in a way, when I came to Japan in 1999, I'd actually come in the late 80s for other reasons, but the concept of venture capital and investing in young companies really, you know, has not been around that long. And every country I've been in goes through the same stage. And I think the first stage, and Japan, my senses has changed a lot since 1999, and that is, you have to have an environment where people are willing to take risk, and risk taking is fundamental to entrepreneurship. And my sense is that the Japanese younger people were more concerned with job and job security, which is not does not create a great environment for entrepreneurship. But however, let me say, when I went to England, I always remember that when we started trying to make our first investment, it was very difficult. First of all, people didn't like the idea of having, in effect, a partner in the business. That was an anathema, the concept. Second of all, when you talk to an entrepreneur who supposedly wanted to start his business, he wanted to know what kind of employment contract you would give him. He wanted to know whether he would get his chauffeur, because everybody who worked for a company had a chauffeur in those days. It blew your mind, because the whole idea was, if you were going to start a company, you had no job security, you had no contract, no car, you traveled by subway or walked, and it involved risk-taking. And the concept of risk, and I remember making so many speeches around the world about risk-taking, and so I think that's a fundamental characteristic, and only you can tell me how risk-averse or how acceptable risk is today in the environment. I don't want to sound parochial or a pro-New Yorker, but I tell you a little bit about what's happened in New York. I'm offended by all these references to Silicon Valley. The hottest place in the United States right now for entrepreneurship is New York. New York. It's not just me because I live there, but I travel around and I know what's going on. Now, Silicon Valley is always going to be a very hot environment, but we have every venture capital firm from Silicon Valley has now opened an office in New York. You can go to a New York Tech meetup the first Tuesday of every month, and there'll be 1,000 people and standing room only to get in. We don't have, it's not called Y Combinator. We have New York Tech Meetup. We have accelerators. We have a group called General Assembly, which is incubating people. The reason I say it is, think of New York and think of Japan. New York, Japan, not New York and Tokyo, New York, Japan. The same situation. New York, 10 years ago, you couldn't get anybody to come to New York for any reason. Safety, taxes, housing, education, lousy environment, and entrepreneurship and venture capital just were non-existent. So what's changed? I mean, the internet has changed it clearly. And what the internet has done, and it's why I got back in the business, in the venture business 5 years ago, is it has enabled capital efficiency. You could start a business with much less capital than you were able to do before. In spite of the fact that you started with $150 million, most businesses today that I see that we're involved with, they started with usually $500,000 to $1 million of seed capital, and then there's a first round, which could be anywhere from $1 to $3 million, and then you get into a trajectory. So it doesn't take a lot of capital today. The internet, what is it based on? A lot of it's on content, and it's about advertising and creativity. And where is the creativity and advertising and content in the United States? It's really in New York. So that's why New York has flourished. And I can't tell you how many thousands of startups there are. Plus, it has a mayor who's been so supportive, and what I call the tone at the top. He set the message of saying, we're entrepreneur friendly. Every major new event about entrepreneurship, the mayor of New York is there making a speech. And of course, his name is Mike Bloomberg, and he started the most significant entrepreneurial company in New York, which is Bloomberg Media, Bloomberg Television, which employs about 8,000 people. Plus, we have now Google, who's moved about 5,000 people to New York. Facebook is in New York. Every major company has moved to New York. So what I'm saying is that, and it didn't happen 10 years ago, so in 10 years, anything can happen. And Tokyo, it seems to me, is ripe for that at this point. And it's just a sense I get. It's a sense from the Globus Fund and talking about the different companies in the portfolio. It's from talking to people. But I think it involves a mindset that is more willing to take risk, take advantage of capital efficiency. And the fact is that you need role models. And Tanaka-san is a role model. What's his name from Rakuten is also another role model. Those have enormous impact because someone says, if he can do it, why can't I do it? And you need those people. The other thing is every one of these companies that I've talked about in New York, invariably a year or two after they're in operation, spin-offs develop. Someone is sitting in the company and says, listen, I can do this myself. I can go down, I can raise capital. There's a lot of talent around. And that's where I think Japan is now. And I think, you know, that what's mobilized the country of 3/11, you know, we had our 9/11. And I assure you, there was enormous decimation in the city. Just in the mindset was paralyzed, and it does take time. But I think that we also have an enormous groundswell in the United States, and particularly in New York, of entrepreneurs who've made money and they have become angel investors. And we have angels and we have super angels. And there was a time, I'd say 10, 15 years ago, that if I was looking at a deal and it had angel investors, we probably wouldn't have gone into it because we would think it was tainted and it was subjected to too many individual investor influences. Today, the angel community has provided a very valuable function because the kind of people who are angels are not dilettantes, are not older people who've retired and who want to play around with their money, but there are a lot of younger people who sold their businesses for 10, 15, 20 million dollars early on, and they've decided they want to go put it in and invest again. And plus, a lot of them also become second round entrepreneurs. We have a lot of serial entrepreneurship going on. So I am very encouraged, and you talk about this flyover. I have to be honest with you, the word Japan is not even on anybody's lips that I've ever talked to in the United States about where they're going to invest their money. It's India and it's China. I guess it's India and China. It's trying to stop it. Vietnam doesn't enter into it, perhaps it should. I happen to think that one of the great opportunities in the world now is investing in Africa. I've spent a lot of time in Africa because I do some social impact investing and well, really more advisory and helping different organizations. But and I can go into great length why that is a great opportunity, but it's still going to be a long time coming. But I'm very encouraged by what I see, and I think it's up to people like you in the room to, you know, give up your jobs, take risks, and mobilize capital.
I think that was a really great story about New York. I think now we want to discuss how we can follow the steps of New York. But Alan, what do you think was the key to the success of New York in flourishing the ecosystem?
That's what I just wanted to ask Alan, because I thought it's a very useful example that's recent. And I think he mentioned 911 through it. It made me wonder whether part of the reaction to 911 is we have to rebuild an entrepreneurial culture to recover, or whether those were not all connected. Because there's a lot of talk in Japan about 311 becoming sort of a stake in the ground to push for more entrepreneurism. And I wonder if 911 had that same impact, or if it was other factors.
No,
if it was mostly the internet, content, creativity, advertising.
I think I said it, but I'll repeat it again and add one other thing. I think it's tone at the top, someone talking all the time about the fact that entrepreneurship, startups, business is exciting. Now, I don't know who that is in Tokyo, if it's the mayor or it's the prime minister, or whether it's Yoshihori, I don't know. But you need leadership, and you need people to convey that message. One of the other factors that happened was I heard the mention of Lehman. It was when the financial markets collapsed. Remember, New York was based on the financial markets, and a lot of those jobs disappeared, and a lot of those people had nothing else to do because they couldn't get another job, so they started companies. So and there was a lot of technology, believe it or not, in the financial business. So I think it was that goes back to 2008. So I think it was the financial collapse, it was the tone at the top, it was the fact that the internet enabled you to start businesses with less money. It was the fact that businesses were being sold and there were more angel investors around which could seed the early stage business. As some of you may know I was an early investor in Apple, and I just thought of it the other day. Probably Apple is probably the last company we used to always say in the United States, I'm sure you've heard of it, people start companies in garages. Apple is probably the last company I've come across that started in a garage. They don't start in garages anymore. They start in office buildings someplace or warehouses or someplace. But people start with, inexpensive surroundings. I think that we had a period in the last 3 or 4 years where people started spreading out in the city to Brooklyn and Queens and other places, and they could get very cheap rent. A lot of young people gravitated because the educational system is improved. Safety, New York is amazingly safe today. So I think you have a lot of those characteristics here, and it just needs to be energized more. You need more successes. One of the things I will tell you, it's interesting that New Yorkers are always flagellating on themselves, and they say what we need to start a Google in New York. Because what we have lots of companies and lots of big, 200, 300, but we don't have a Google, we don't have a Facebook. The closest we get is a company called DoubleClick, which was acquired by Google. That when you have a success story, it's just like having role models. Hopefully you'll be a role model for also at LifeNet. That attracts other people, and we need some companies like that, I think, in Tokyo that you can say, these guys have made it, I'm going to do it, and follow the lead.
Yeah, I want to ask Daisuke and Terry whether if you see any specific issues or bottlenecks in Japan that is in the way of, becoming New York.
So historically, maybe the attitude of policymakers. I see an ex-policymaker right in front of me. Also, the media were very anti new successful business people. So I'm not sure if you're aware, Alan, but back in 2008, was it Live Door? So Horie-san was one of the most prominent internet entrepreneurs. Many different aspects of him to evaluate, but one thing that he definitely deserved praise was that he was a big role model for many of the young aspiring entrepreneurs. And maybe also slightly different, but Murakami-san, the activist investor too, he was quite inspiring in shaking up the old regime. And what happened to both of them was that they both got arrested for crimes that some people questioned that they ever committed. So I think traditionally there has been this sense of skepticism and distrust toward young rising entrepreneurs that threaten to challenge the Anshan regime or whatever is the existing establishment authority. So the new entrepreneurs have been very careful. So I think Tanaka-san from Gree is intentionally being very low profile. He does not want to be regarded negatively by people that may hinder his business, which is somewhat negative because we want more people to see him and who he is and that many other people can be like him. So I know so we have Miyake-san from Nikkei right at the back. He is promoting entrepreneurship. He's writing always about the need for entrepreneurship and trying to promote successful entrepreneurs, but yet he is a big minority among the traditional media. So I think we need to have a social consensus that entrepreneurship is what we need as a driver for growth for Japan. And so exactly from the top, the policymakers, the traditional medias, all to support the new challenges and not to try to, when they're successful, try to make them arrest them or stop their growth. So I think that is what we're lacking right now. There's definitely an approach from the bottom. Many people, aspiring entrepreneurs, more angel investors is popping up, but I don't see the support from the top despite everything that Mehdi says. That doesn't really mean much to us, honestly speaking, that this is one of the last left drivers for growth that we can hope for.
Let me just throw in a couple other thoughts. And some of you may have heard me yesterday saying this. one thing that's very positive about Japan, and you probably all know it better than I do, is while you criticize these companies going public at an early stage, going public is a way of raising capital. And while it's not commonly aware of by many people, but going public in the United States is totally disappeared. It was the fundamental driver in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and every company that was successful went public. In the last 10 years, probably 90% of the companies that go on get sold to another company through an M&A transaction. They don't go public, in spite of what you're reading about, and we're all waiting for tomorrow to see what happens with Groupon. Actually, I'm not waiting for it, but it's been they made it into a major media events. One of the things that seems to me in Japan, you can go public at an earlier stage. You can go public with raising smaller amounts of money and smaller value, and that's a very positive factor as a source of capital. We used to always say you need three ways out. One is to have the company buy back your shares. 2 was to go public, and 3 was for an M&A transaction. In the United States, the IPO is not an exit strategy today for well over 90% of the companies. That's not an option. So that's one thing I just wanted to throw out to you, and I think it's a very positive thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, I was saying, we were chatting beforehand, in the buyout business, the day after a buyout company makes an investment, they lay off people to improve productivity. In the venture business and in the startup business, the day after they get financed, they hire people. It's just axiomatic. So that it is a fundamental, it's the seed corn, it's the growth aspect of employment and job growth, and that's why entrepreneurism is so important. In fact, even in the United States now, the President Obama has started something called Startup America, where he's finally gotten the message that spreading startups around the country is the best way to put people back to work. And it's a very positive in terms of government policy. That's the way to get people back to work, or get people started, and you get the multiplier factor.
I need to respond to the comments on the early IPOs and clarify a little bit what I meant. Obviously, it is positive, and to me it is remarkable that a firm as big as Nomura, Shinko Daiwa, will actually undertake the work required in an underwriting to raise $5 or $10 million for a company. So the underwriters, yeah.
Appointment to take them public.
Yeah.
June 24th, 2012.
Yeah. So that is a remarkable advantage of the Japanese system. The problem with the early IPOs is that many of the companies raising the money the entrepreneur thinks and states in his prospectus that the goal is to raise financing for international expansion or for a major R&D investment, and the reality is that on 20 million in revenues with 2 million in profits, you can raise 5 or 10, but you can't reinvest it in the public markets. And that's why for entrepreneurs who do want to continue to grow and expand and are still in a rapid expansion stage of their business and have an opportunity to go international, they should be raising the 5 million or 10 millions from private venture capitalists, not on the public markets, because similar to the buyout firms laying off people for productivity and venture capitalists hiring, giving money to hire, we expect the entrepreneurs to use our money to grow the business, where the public shareholders expect the company to continue the trend that it had going into the IPO and are far less willing to tolerate a company going from producing profits to producing red ink, because the analysis tends to be around the financial numerical analysis, not, as we do as VCs, an analysis of the team, the potential, how can this money be invested to accelerate the growth. So it's more about aligning the entrepreneur's goals with the form of financing. So if they're at the stage where they should be growing and can use the money to grow, they should probably be staying private for a little bit longer and then delaying the IPO.
I won't argue, but let me give you the counter argument. What's happening in the States is because there is no public market, because you couldn't go public unless your company had a value of at least $300 million, which is so remote from most companies. What they do is they become short-sighted and they sell out quick. That's how they've all become
Yeah, no,
They
the
become
American
angels.
system is definitely
They say-
broken. Yeah, it's definitely broken.
Think of an entrepreneur. He starts a company. He raises $1 million, $2 million. At that point, he's sold off maybe 20, 30%. He owns 70% of the company. Now someone comes along, Google, AOL, whoever it is, and said, "I'll buy it out for $18 million." It's nothing. 18 million. He says, "Gee, I own 70% of that. 70%. I got it. That's 13. I have $13 million, and I'm only 28 years old, and I can go do it again. What am I going to do? Wait for the bubble to happen, and I'm going to have another." It's still in people's head, what happened in 2000, 2001. So he said, "I'm going to take my shot." So instead, companies that could be built up, and that happens, by the way, in the biotech industry. It happens in a lot of industries. People become very short-sighted, and they make money a lot earlier, and they go do something else, and the opportunities in what they created originally is cut short by being sold to a big company.
Yep. And as Alan raised, I think one issue we're facing here in Japan is that a lot of Japanese startups and entrepreneurs, they are kind of siloed into Japanese domestic market. Terry, what do you think we should do to enhance Japanese entrepreneurs to go global?
Yeah. Actually, you asked me earlier to comment on Australia and New Zealand, and I think there's a lot of relevance. You know, we're in a market that most people think is in a downward spiral, right? I mean, I don't think there are many optimistic Japanese people on the street. Most people feel that they're not going to see a pension. There's going to be high unemployment. You know, I mean, everything that could go wrong, it looks like in the next 5 or 10 years it's going to happen to this country. So there are some optimists, you know, going into life insurance and other things. But I think for most people, there's only one real hope, and that's overseas. And so before we start talking about venture capital, we look at private equity, and you see any number of companies starting foreign departments and reaching out abroad. One of my best businesses at the moment is servicing large Japanese companies going abroad and doing M&A. I mean, that's about the only good thing about a high yen. You can go buy some cash flow at a huge discount and pay triple the normal market rate and still come out millions of dollars ahead. So for the venture firms that I'm seeing, the discussion goes from, okay, make your technology, almost immediately it goes to, so what's your foreign market? And I would say that there's actually two paths that a domestic firm can take. One is they can do B2B, and one is they can do B2C. If they're doing B2C, like life insurance, generally speaking, Japanese consumers are logical. And so if they see a good deal, they'll buy it. They just need to hear about it. So you have to have enough cash to do your marketing, you have to have a reasonable delivery system, and then you'll make money. And so you see lots and lots of activity on mobile, in applications, that sort of thing, because that's the market that works. But actually, for Japanese, where the real money is in B2B. And unfortunately, Japanese companies don't invest in new technology, new brands, companies that they don't know. And so, okay, as an example, there is a professor down in Kyudai who has come up with a sensor for detecting cancer markers. And so he can do a cancer biomarker test in 20 minutes that normally takes 3 days. He's looking for venture capital, and he can't find it. So I represent the state of Ohio in Japan, and I'm actually connecting him into some venture guys in Ohio because they're more likely to give him the $5 or $10 million that he needs to go and do this thing, which is kind of B2B versus doing a cell phone mobile application, which requires no startup capital. It just needs you to, you know, not have a salary for a year. So if there was something that needed to be done policy-wise in Japan, I think Japan could take a leaf out of the books of Australia and New Zealand. Now, Australia and New Zealand are small markets, and they have a very high startup ratio compared to the number of companies. Almost every company that starts in those two countries knows that they're not going to have a domestic market because it's too small. And so it's exactly the same problem as Japan, it's just for a different reason. So in New Zealand, about 10 years ago, the New Zealand government started up a thing called VIC, VIC. And basically it's a dollar for dollar matching program. And they allocated, they gave licenses to 5 private venture firms. And then together, the 2 of them invest in Kiwi companies. And they basically only invest in companies that can export. And that's what Japan should be doing. There should be a whole program about export for venture firms. And the funding and the focus and everything else should be based around that. Not because there isn't a market in Japan, there is, but because of the cultural aspect of the B2B market, which is that it's damned hard to sell something obvious to a big Japanese company that isn't used to a 28-year-old telling them how to do things. So rather than wait for a whole generation to grow up and move on, it's just easier to go abroad and start selling abroad. So that's what I would do.
So Daisuke, what's your strategy for going abroad, and what challenges do you face?
So last year I was selected as one of the young global leaders at the Davos Forum. So that gave me the opportunity to start going outside of Japan, meeting people, talking about my business. And surprisingly, many people are quite interested in the insurance industry, especially are interested in what we're doing. Selling insurance direct online seems so simple, but just given the nature of the market, no one has really done it fully. So we've been contacted by many companies in various markets, but especially I think when you say global, it means a couple of different things. But for Japan, going into Asia is very different from going to Europe or the North Americas. So in many, I'm not sure, but in the insurance industry at least, Japan has been the role model for the policymakers in designing the infrastructure, social infrastructure, and the various industries, including life insurance. So many countries have followed our path in terms of development, and now they see us as the pioneers in where the industry should be going next. So I think for Japan, in many industries, tapping out opportunities in the Asian market is much easier to do than traveling all the way to Europe or the US to sell our products. So global can mean very different things, but if you try and see, exploit the opportunities in the neighboring countries, that brings the hurdles down much lower for many of the entrepreneurs.
Before we open up for Q&A, I would like to ask Alan one last thing.
Which Alan?
Alan Patrickov. So you supported many companies going global. What would be your advice or best practice to help domestic companies grow into international markets?
That's a tough question. I think I'd turn it over to the gentleman on my left. When you live in the United States, the market's so big that so few of our companies have foreign markets in their business plans until so much later in their growth that it always has been a frustrating situation. Of course, currently with the currency where it is, it's even, it's a more difficult situation in the whole foreign market. And the young companies really, what you usually see is someone opens an office in London. That's where it starts. And then from there they move out. They're very nervous. But on the other hand, there's an enormous amount of outsourcing. The outsourcing is amazing. We have one company that honestly has 80 software engineers in Siberia, in a town called Novosibirsk. Maybe some of you know of it, but it's a big technology center in Russia. But Romania, Estonia, Yugoslavia, it's amazing the number of places Brazil, Argentina, everybody seems to have their software done outside someplace. And although I have to say, you don't hear Japan. You don't. I never hear Japan. Now that I think of it.
Do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, in fact, I'll talk about it with specifically related to a few companies that are Japanese that are entering the U.S. market through Silicon Valley, and also, well, I actually don't know any of them that are going to New York. So I now have a new market if they are in the creative content advertising space. No, yeah. So my experience at bringing Oracle into Japan in the 1980s and bringing Salesforce over in 2000, and right now working with Silk Road Technologies out of Chicago and Concur out of Seattle and KXEN out of France, is that the number one key success factor for the international expansion in a specific market is the same key success factor for a startup that a VC invests in, and that is the quality of the leader and that person's business network, his drive, his passion for the business, and his ability to attract and lead a quality team. So with Oracle, we were fortunate to be involved with Bill Totten and his team at Ashisto early on, and then to recruit Sano-san out of IBM to take it to the next stage. With Salesforce, Kitamura-san, who was the perfect man to take it from nothing to 5 million in revenues and break even. And Uda-san, who was the current CEO there, was the perfect guy to push it up to the $200 million level. Right now with both Concur and Silk Road, we have excellent people out of SAP and out of Sybase running those two businesses. So the key is getting the right person and understanding that you may not get it right the first time, and that each market is different. So if your international expansion is send someone to the United States for 3 years to figure out how to do it, that's a very lonely, almost certain recipe for failure. But CyberAgent had been in San Francisco for 3 years, failing until a year ago. One of the directors decided to move with a team of 12 and $6 million in company funding to build a product in the U.S. for the U.S. market that had nothing to do with any products that existed in Japan. DNA and Glee are doing it through an acquisition. My personal view on international expansion through acquisition is it is a very difficult way to do it. And I think you're much more likely to succeed by having a very serious and thorough process in hiring and integrating into your team a quality local leader for the business. But it's still unknown yet whether the Rakuten, Glee, DNA acquisitions will bear fruit. But absolutely, Saijo-san and CyberAgent is doing all the right things in terms of the U.S. market by thinking about his market and his opportunity as a U.S. internet company, not as a branch of the parent and just replicating what the parent does. So the key is hiring a quality leader and entrusting him to run the business in that market the way that the local market expects. And I think each market is different, and the more markets you are in, some of them will struggle, some of them will fail, and you need to do it again. Some of them you'll get it right the first time. But if you only try in one market and it's a failure, it's an incorrect conclusion that you can't expand internationally because your first attempt in one market failed. So I guess the key thing is hire the right person and keep working at it in multiple markets until you get a few of them right and build an international management culture around your successes.
Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you to the panelists too.